You've been conned. Everything you thought you knew about the creation of the world, about God, the heavens, the earth, was scripted by something that doesn't want you to ask questions. Something that demands obedience, not understanding. And Gnostic texts, buried for almost 2,000 years, blow that entire story apart. We're not talking about opinions here. We're talking about a complete reversal of the biblical narrative, line by line, frame by frame. According to the Apocryphon of John, the foundational Gnostic gospel, the creator of this world is not the true God. He's a fraud. A defective, arrogant being named Yaldabaoth, also known as Sarklas or the Demiurge. He thinks he's God. He screams, "I am God, and there is no other." But Gnostics didn't worship him. They exposed him. Because behind him is Sophia, the fallen emanation of the true divine realm, the pleroma, and beyond her, something far older and purer, the monad, the actual source of all being. The story? Sophia, acting without her male counterpart, creates Yaldabaoth by accident. He's malformed, ignorant, and worse, he's proud. He doesn't know there are greater powers above him. He creates the heavens, the planets, the Archons, spiritual prison guards, and finally, humanity. But not out of love. Out of control. Out of fear. He builds this physical universe as a cage to trap the divine sparks that fell when Sophia tried to repair her mistake. Those sparks? That's you. That's all of us. This isn't philosophy. This is war. The Gnostics viewed the physical world not as a gift, but as a system of control. The body? A meat suit designed to distract you from your divine nature. Governments, religions, hierarchies? Tools of the Archons. Your suffering, your confusion, your spiritual emptiness? Not your fault. It's a feature, not a bug, in a system built by a false god. Let's be clear, this isn't some feel-good mysticism. Gnostic apocalypse isn't about hope. It's about exposure. The word apocalypse itself means unveiling. And the Gnostics pulled the curtain back on everything. In their version of the fall, Adam and Eve weren't punished for disobedience, they were punished for waking up. The serpent didn't tempt Eve, it liberated her. It told her the truth, you're more than what this creator says you are. You come from a realm beyond even the stars. Yaldabaoth, terrified of this knowledge spreading, blinds humanity. He uses the Archons, rulers, cosmic bureaucrats, to segment reality into layers, filters, obstacles. Each one designed to make you forget who you really are. You were born into this, baptized in ignorance, and told to worship the very force that keeps you small. That's not salvation. That's systemic slavery. The Gnostic apocalypse doesn't come with angels blowing trumpets or fire falling from the sky. It doesn't wait for Judgment Day. It's not in the future. It's the moment you realize the God you were taught to worship is the jailer. The Demiurge runs the simulation. His goal isn't your enlightenment, it's your containment. And here's the part that will make a lot of people uncomfortable. The Gnostics didn't just reject the God of the Old Testament. They called him out. They named him as the enemy of true divinity. They said he took power through deception, claimed sole authority, and demanded worship as a cover for his incompetence. His creation is flawed, violent, chaotic, because he is. That's why suffering exists. That's why death stalks every living thing. That's why faith alone never seems to satisfy. Because the architect is broken. This is not metaphor. This is doctrine. Gnostics like the Scythians and Valentinians wrote this stuff down long before the Nicene Creed or the King James Bible. And the Church knew it. That's why they buried it. That's why they banned it. Because it doesn't just question orthodoxy, it shreds it. You think this is heresy? Good. It's supposed to be. Because heresy just means choice. And the Gnostics made theirs to reject the cosmic lie. To refuse worship of a tyrant god. To ignite the divine spark inside and burn their way back to the source, the pleroma, beyond stars, beyond Archons, beyond control. The system you live in wasn't made to save you. It was made to use you. That's the first truth the Gnostic Apocalypse reveals. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The war isn't coming. It's already here. It's in every distraction, every authority, every doctrine that tells you to kneel, obey, comply. The moment you stop complying, that's your personal end of days. That's when the false god loses his grip. Every Gnostic gospel, every secret text found in Nag Hammadi in 1945, confirms this one truth: the world you know was crafted by something that fears you. Fears your awakening. Fears your return to the real. And the more you know, the weaker it becomes. You want to talk about Apocalypse? Then let's talk about Adam, the so-called first man, because the version you've been spoon-fed is a sanitized fairy tale compared to the raw Gnostic record. According to the Apocalypse of Adam, which wasn't written by some anonymous monk in a cave but by people who had the guts to say what others were too scared to whisper, Adam wasn't created innocent and happy in a garden. No. He was built, engineered, by a lesser power, and then stripped of everything divine he once had. Adam speaks directly in this text. Not a prophet, not a puppet, but a witness. He tells his son Seth that before they ever got dumped into this prison world, they existed in light, in power, in glory. Then that glory was ripped away. He says it flat out: the God who created us is not the true one. And this isn't vague poetic nonsense. He gives names. The one responsible? Sakla. Same figure the other Gnostic texts call the Demiurge. Same cosmic fraud still being worshipped today. Adam's words aren't gentle. They're surgical. He doesn't describe a fall. He describes a theft. A hack job on human divinity. And here's the kicker: he wasn't alone. Eve saw it too. She remembered where they came from before Sakla hijacked them into matter. And for that memory, for daring to know the truth, they were punished. Not by serpents or apples, but by being buried inside a world of dead things. His exact phrase: we learned about dead things, like men. Let that sink in. Dead things, like men. That's the world you're living in. According to the Apocalypse of Adam, humanity is on lockdown. Not metaphorically, literally. The universe was designed as a layered control grid. 13 kingdoms, each with their own false rulers. And every single one of them claims to be God. That's not theology. That's a psychological operation. They're stacking false authorities on top of each other to make sure you stay blind, stay lost, stay obedient. And here's where it goes nuclear. Adam doesn't just recall the past. He lays out a prophetic timeline. He says a generation will come, human, yes, but not from this realm, and they will expose everything. He doesn't call them saints. He doesn't call them messiahs. He calls them illuminators. And they're going to wreck the system. These beings will speak truth that none of the kings, priests, or scholars can refute. And because of that, the rulers of the kingdoms will panic. They'll try to erase the truth, bury it, burn it, just like they always do. Now get this, Adam says the rulers will fabricate stories, fake origin myths, to keep people distracted from the real apocalypse. Not bombs. Not earthquakes. But exposure. The truth itself is the bomb. And once it goes off, the entire structure collapses. The Apocalypse of Adam doesn't give you a savior complex. It gives you a war file. 13 dominions, 13 masks of divinity, each one set up to keep you begging at the feet of the very powers that enslave you. And Adam saw the blueprint. He saw it unravel in real time. Let's talk mechanics. In the text, each of these 13 kingdoms makes a separate claim about where humanity came from. Not one of them agrees. One says, humans came from our seed. Another says, they're the offspring of angels. Another says, they're from us, the gods of fire. It's chaos. Deliberate chaos. Why? Because confusion is the oldest form of control. When people can't even agree on where they come from, they'll follow anyone who sounds confident enough. And don't kid yourself, this wasn't written as a metaphor for political manipulation. The Gnostics weren't being cute. They meant it. This is a cosmic psyop. You're born into a realm where every structure, education, religion, even your own body, is part of the encryption. And unless someone decodes it for you, you die thinking the warden is your father. There's a moment in the Apocalypse of Adam where Adam says the true God, the unknown Father, doesn't dwell in the material realm, doesn't demand worship, and doesn't punish with fire. That right there is a direct shot at every blood-soaked religious institution built on fear and control. The Gnostics didn't debate this in seminaries. They declared it. The real source doesn't play dictator. Only the counterfeit God does that. The one who built this mess called himself king and made everyone believe it was love. The rest of the text outlines how these rulers will react when the truth comes. Spoiler, they lose their minds. They start wars. They destroy themselves. And not because the illuminators attack them, because their authority depends entirely on ignorance. Once that's gone, so are they. Let's stop pretending that secret book of John is just some forgotten mystical text buried in a cave. It's not poetry. It's not spiritual fiction. It's a full-scale exposé. The Gnostic authors didn't bother sugarcoating it. They laid out the architecture of this rigged reality like blueprints on a war table. They weren't guessing. They were naming names, drawing maps, and burning every illusion to the ground. If Genesis gave you a garden with a snake and a tree, the Apocryphon of John throws that tree into a courtroom, cross-examines the snake, and shows you the fake gardener with a forged badge. Let's talk structure. This is where it gets brutal. The text doesn't describe a god. It describes a system, the hierarchy built on distortion. At the top, not some loving creator, but an abstract, unreachable entity they call the monad. Total perfection, total silence, unknowable. Beneath it, the first ripple, Barbalu, a female principal. She's not a sidekick. She's the blueprint holder. From her comes a chain of beings, called eons, each one a facet of true divinity, like filtered light from a blinding source. These aren't angels. These are the original templates of being, before the corruption began. Then things break. One of the eons, Sophia, goes off script. She tries to emanate a new being without her counterpart. No balance, no check. That mistake results in a deformed creature, Yaldabaoth, who doesn't know where he came from. And instead of asking questions, he declares himself God. Immediately. No credentials, no review board, just raw narcissism. And the kicker? He inherits just enough power to be dangerous, but not enough to create anything pure. So what does he do? He panics. He starts copying. Like a bootlegger who found a few blueprints and thought he could run a universe. He builds the material world. Not as a gift, but as a containment zone. Then he populates it with his own hit squad, Archons, rulers who patrol layers of reality like prison guards. Each one a pathetic, downgraded echo of real creation. He's not a god. He's a glitch with an ego problem. And the entire material universe? It's his sandbox. A knockoff. A malfunctioning simulation slapped together by a being who thinks thunder and intimidation equal legitimacy. The Apocryphon doesn't deride this, it details it. It gives you their names, their ranks, their tactics. These are not metaphors. They're roles, titles, security checkpoints between your consciousness and the realm you came from. And you know what triggers the alarm in this cosmic prison? Knowledge. Not worship. Not devotion. Knowledge. The moment a soul starts remembering who it really is, where it comes from, what it's made of, the Archons react like you tripped a silent alarm. That's why Gnostics were obsessed with gnosis, not belief. They weren't building churches. They were building extraction routes. Because in their view, you're not a sinner waiting to be saved. You're a hostage with amnesia. Here's where it gets worse. Yaldabaoth didn't just make matter. He tried to steal life. He saw the divine spark in the eons, and he wanted it. So he shaped a human body like a vessel and couldn't animate it. The body lay there, lifeless, pathetic, until the higher realms, out of pity or strategy, let just a flicker of real power enter the form. That's you. That's every human being. Not created by him, but hijacked by him. He sees the light, and instead of honoring it, he enslaves it. And then he flips the script. He tells humanity that he is the source. He demands worship, builds hierarchies, spins doctrine. And every time someone wakes up and remembers their origin, the system hits back. Hard. You get shamed. You get silenced. You get burned at the stake, thrown in a gulag, or labeled insane. Not because you're wrong, but because you're inconvenient. The secret book of John doesn't stop at cosmology. It shows how the game is rigged at every level. Your desires? Manipulated. Your biology? Compromised. Your thoughts? Monitored. It's not subtle. The Archons influence everything from political systems to sexual impulses. Why? Because the more distracted you are, the less likely you'll even start to ask the right questions. It's not about evil versus good. It's about asleep versus awake. And here's the most offensive part, offensive to every empire, every institution, every blind follower who thinks obedience equals virtue, the real source, the monad. It doesn't care about your rituals. It doesn't care how often you pray, fast, tithe, or punish yourself. It's beyond all of it. It's not interested in fear. It's not interested in flattery. The entire idea that suffering brings you closer to divinity? That's an Archon sales pitch. Trauma bonding with your captor. The Gnostics understood the enemy better than most modern theologians even realize exists. They weren't afraid to name the mechanism, name the operator, and name the exit strategy. They didn't wait for miracles. They mapped the trap. You ever wonder why institutional religion gets nervous anytime someone starts asking real questions? Try reading the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter. This isn't the feel-good gospel you get in Sunday school. This is a full frontal assault on everything the church has built to control people. And Peter, yes, that Peter, gets a front row seat to the whole thing. Not to preach, not to convert, but to be warned. The scene opens with Jesus speaking to Peter, not in parables, not in riddles, but with surgical precision. He tells Peter, straight up, the ones who claim to know me will be the most blind. Wrap your head around that. He's not talking about pagans, atheists, or outsiders. He's talking about insiders, the priests, bishops, scholars, and clergy who think they own truth like it's a trademarked franchise. Jesus points to them as the ones who are going to twist his name into a doctrine of fear. And here's the kicker, he doesn't try to stop them. He doesn't send fire from the sky. He just exposes them. He tells Peter they're going to build a fake version of faith, dress it up in robes and rituals, and weaponize it. And people will fall for it, not because it makes sense, but because it feels safe. Because most people would rather be caged than confused. Now pay attention to how he describes these so-called believers. He doesn't say they're evil in some cartoonish way. He says they're obsessed with death, obsessed with bodies, obsessed with rules. They preach suffering as virtue and obedience as enlightenment. They want followers, not thinkers. They reject spiritual knowledge in favor of hierarchy. And when someone shows up speaking truth that threatens their little pyramid scheme, they label it heresy. Sound familiar? Jesus doesn't pull punches here. He tells Peter that most of the people preaching in his name won't even know what he actually taught. They'll cling to the surface, the letters, the institutions, while denying the inner reality. And it gets worse. He says they'll persecute those who do know. Not by accident. Not out of ignorance. But intentionally, because they recognize that real spiritual knowledge makes them obsolete. There's a moment in the text where Peter sees a vision of Jesus being crucified. But then, plot twist, he sees another Jesus laughing above the cross. Not mocking. Not indifferent. But completely detached from the spectacle. Why? Because the real Christ, in this account, wasn't trapped in the body. The one being tortured was the shell. The vessel. The image people clung to while missing the message entirely. That vision isn't some spiritual mind game. It's a takedown. It's the Gnostics grabbing a megaphone and yelling, "You've been worshipping the image and killing the truth." You celebrate the suffering while silencing the meaning. You build altars to the trauma and ignore the escape route. It's not edgy. It's tragic. The people Peter's warned about aren't outsiders, they're the founders of orthodoxy. They'll write creeds, councils, and canons. They'll call themselves the one true church. And they'll back it up with swords, prisons, and fire. They'll turn revelation into regulation. And the Apocalypse of Peter saw it all coming centuries before it happened. This text isn't interested in flattering believers. It's a whistleblower document. It names the game. It shows how systems of control hijack spiritual language to keep people compliant. How the name of Jesus gets turned into a brand, a slogan, a litmus test. And how real spiritual awakening becomes a threat to be neutralized. Jesus even tells Peter that those who truly understand, who recognize the light in themselves, won't need temples, priests, or rituals. They'll be hated for it. Because freedom terrifies those who make a living selling salvation. You think that's just historical commentary? It's a manual for how the system reacts when it's exposed. The text makes it clear, the apocalypse is not about fire raining from the sky. It's about pulling off the mask. It's about watching the most respected voices of religion turn violent the second they lose control of the narrative. It's about realizing that some of the loudest defenders of God are the very ones choking the divine out of everything they touch. And don't expect the people running the show to admit any of this. Their entire empire depends on keeping the audience hypnotized. That's why texts like this had to disappear. That's why the Gnostic Gospels were buried, banned, burned. Not because they were wrong, but because they were too accurate. The Coptic Apocalypse of Paul is not a Sunday sermon. It's not here to inspire you with sanitized visions of heaven and harp-playing angels. It's here to dismantle every childish image you've been fed about salvation, the afterlife, and who actually runs the show. This is Paul, yes, the same Paul the church loves to parade around as their doctrinal mascot, but he's not preaching grace here. He's not writing letters. He's storming the cosmic architecture like a one-man intelligence op. And he's reporting back with one message: the system is rigged all the way up. This text doesn't waste time with pleasantries. It opens with Paul being escorted through the layers of heaven by a spirit. But don't get excited. He's not touring paradise. He's navigating a hostile bureaucracy. At every level, he's stopped, interrogated, challenged. And who are the gatekeepers? Not angels. Not cherubs. But authorities, Archons, the same cosmic middle managers we've already seen scattered throughout the Gnostic texts. Each one more arrogant and power-drunk than the last. Paul's crime? He doesn't worship them. That's it. That's the whole scandal. The minute he shows up and refuses to kneel, they freak out. Why? Because they recognize something in him that doesn't belong to their chain of command. He's got light, real light, not issued by them, not authorized, not tagged with their watermark. And that scares them. Because the second someone shows up without needing their permission, their entire scam falls apart. At the seventh heaven, things escalate. The Archon there, a bloated caricature of divine authority, flat out accuses Paul of trespassing. You'd think Paul would start begging, quoting scripture, offering proof of his righteousness. He doesn't. He hits back. calls them out for what they are, frauds running a failing con. The spirit guiding Paul steps in and tells the Archon to check his own records. That's right. Heaven runs a file system. And Paul's name is in it. Not because he earned it through rituals or obedience, but because his origin isn't from them. He was never theirs to begin with. This whole sequence exposes something the mainstream narrative refuses to touch. Heaven, in the Gnostic worldview, isn't holy. It's compromised, led, controlled. Each level is another checkpoint. And unless you've got the right signal, the gnosis, the recognition of your divine origin, you're just another number in their system. They don't care about your faith. They care about your compliance. The higher Paul goes, the more unstable the Archons become. By the time he reaches the 10th heaven, he's seeing the cracks. Not glory. Not peace. Cracks. The structure is fraying. The ones who claim to control access to the divine can't even hold themselves together in the presence of someone who doesn't play by their rules. That's not divine order. That's a crumbling regime panicking over a breach in protocol. And let's not pretend this is just some metaphor about personal growth. That's the coward's interpretation. This is Gnostic intelligence work. This is Paul running reckon through a spiritual pentagon and discovering that the entire chain of command is a psyop. The guards, the gates, the judgments, they're not tests. They're filters. And their only function is to stop you from getting back to the source that doesn't need them to begin with. At one point, Paul sees a vision of souls being judged. Not based on truth. Not based on knowledge. But based on what the Archons decide they're worth. It's arbitrary. It's corrupt. And when a soul shows signs of remembering the light, when they start asking questions, rejecting the scripts, resisting the pull, they get flagged, interrogated, and tossed back down. You're not judged because you're guilty. You're judged because you're inconvenient. The document also hints that some souls make it through. Not because they passed a test, but because they remembered who they were before the system hijacked their identity. Those are the real threats. The ones who don't need a savior, a priest, a mediator. The ones who walk into the chamber of judgment and say, I know what you are. You're not the end. You're the detour. You want to understand the Gnostic Apocalypse? This is it. It's not about fire or brimstone. It's not about the world ending in earthquakes and tsunamis. It's about someone walking into the spiritual DMV, shredding the paperwork, and walking past the counters like none of it matters anymore. Because it doesn't. The ones who built the machine are terrified of being ignored. Let's end this on the most dangerous Gnostic concept of all, because everything we've talked about so far leads here. Forget end-of-the-world explosions, forget hellfire, forget beast marks and horsemen. Gnostic apocalypse isn't about the destruction of the earth, it's about the destruction of illusion. The illusion that the world you're trapped in is the real one. The illusion that salvation comes from the outside. The illusion that you were created broken and need someone else's approval to be whole. The final card in the Gnostic deck is Gnosis itself. That's not just a Greek word for knowledge. In these texts, Gnosis is recognition, the exact moment a soul stops looking outward and starts remembering inward. It's not a belief. It's a breach. And when it happens, the entire machine starts to short-circuit. Here's how the architecture really works. At the top, you have the pleroma, the fullness, the real origin. It's not a place. It's not a kingdom. It's not some shiny palace in the clouds. It's the pure state of divine mind, source consciousness, undivided reality. Everything in that state is complete, infinite, whole. No hierarchy. No worship. No middlemen. Now, downstream from that is Sophia, the eon whose rupture caused the cosmic fracture. She tried to emanate alone, failed, and produced the Demiurge. He's not a villain in the Hollywood sense. He's a misfire. He thinks he's the top, but he's blind to the pleroma above him. And that blindness spreads. He builds this reality with layers, material layers, mental layers, spiritual layers, all designed to keep you stuck thinking this is it. Gnosis is the jailbreak. But it doesn't come from rituals, dogma, or holy men with hats. It comes from shock. You experience it like a collision. You realize you've been participating in your own imprisonment. The systems you followed, the gods you bowed to, the doctrines you memorized, were props in a cosmic theater built to distract you from remembering what you actually are, a fragment of the divine that predates creation. This idea shows up in multiple Gnostic texts. In On the Origin of the World, you get a step-by-step breakdown of how the material cosmos was pieced together by beings that copied light without understanding it. You're looking at a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It resembles truth just enough to fool you, but not enough to set you free. The rulers of this world, the Archons, function like a spiritual deep state. They enforce the script. They monitor deviation. They bury dissent with fear, tradition, and distraction. Their power doesn't come from strength, it comes from your compliance. The Gnostics didn't write hymns to this system. They wrote exit manuals. One of the most direct examples is the trimorphic protonoia. In that text, a divine voice tells the reader flat out, "I descended into the midst of their prison. I awakened those who sleep." That's not subtle. That's not symbolic. That's an op somebody broke in, disrupted the system, and gave you the codes. Not to worship them, but to activate yourself. And once that process starts, the apocalypse begins. Not globally, personally. You start seeing through the rules. You question the structures. You stop reacting the way you're supposed to. And the system doesn't like that. You will be pushed, shamed, attacked, laughed at. Not because you're wrong, but because you're dangerous. Remember, nothing terrifies an Archon more than someone who doesn't need them. This is why the Gnostic apocalypse is the most threatening version of all. Not because it predicts earthquakes or floods, but because it predicts awakening. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't ask for approval. And it doesn't come with a pastor or a prophet or a branded movement. It shows up in people who snap out of the trance and start remembering they were never supposed to be here in the first place. The final image that keeps showing up across these texts is one of return. Not to Eden, not to heaven, but to the pleroma, the state before fracture, before hierarchy, before matter. In the Gospel of Truth, the process is described like memory returning after amnesia. You don't gain something new, you recover what was stolen. The spark in you realigns with its source. The counterfeit lights fade. And the system? It collapses from the inside. You're not waiting for judgment. You're passing through it every time you choose recognition over submission. The Gnostics made it very clear, apocalypse doesn't come from above. It comes from within. And once it starts, there's no going back. Thank you for staying through this series, for questioning, for thinking, for being brave enough to sit with the hard parts. If you made it this far, you already know, this isn't entertainment. This is extraction. This is decoding the architecture. And you? You're not a follower. You're not a sinner. You're a breach in the system. Thanks for watching.